Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind. My name is Hannah and I'll be your host for this evening. Week 13 is pretty much in the books now and things are really starting to hot up for both the NFL and the fantasy playoffs. We've got loads to dig into, so let's get going.
I just want to rewind to when we were young and hard. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
There's just two of us this evening, the best two of the Rewind squad. So it's just Lewis and I this evening. Good evening, Lewis. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. It is a shame not to have a big shouty Welsh voice with us as well, but it does make for a sort of quieter, more analytical show this week, I'd say. I thought it was a weird and interesting.
Exactly. Now, Lewis, We're having an interesting issue with Lewis's internet. I don't know if it's me or if it's Lewis. Lewis, are you back?
I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. It's a good start to the show, isn't it?
He doesn't seem to be. Well, I was thinking about doing a little rhyme this evening, but after Lewis's amazing rhyme last week, I decided that I couldn't possibly match him anymore. So I was going back to being boring. Lewis is just way too good at rhyming and things like that. So I'm sorry, everybody. I didn't have an amazing rhyme like Lewis did, unfortunately.
I can freestyle one if you want. I think I'm back.
Oh, he's back. He's back. Right, go on then. Give us a freestyle. I did think about putting together a rap, but then I decided that was way too much effort and I was going way too far.
I'm trying to think. I normally put it together while I'm like waiting for Paul to join, but I'm not sure whether or not I can do it necessarily on the fly. And trying to think what rhymes with Tyreek Hill.
Bills.
Yeah, Bills.
Yeah, I'm not very, to be honest, I'm not very rhyming, not very good at rhymes. So I don't think that I'm the person to continue this one on. But Lewis, you're going to have to continue at the helm with the great rhymes when you are hosting. I think Paul let us down a few weeks ago, so I'm just going to be the next letdown and leave it to you to rhyme for us.
It's a nice little treat every 3 weeks that people get the rhyming intro, and we'll keep it to that as much as possible. Sorry that my internet's really in and out.
No, don't worry. These things happen, don't they? It's been bad weather here in the UK and it affects everything, doesn't it? But the great news, Lewis, is that week 14 is actually the last week of buys coming up. So there's only 2 teams on buys this week, the Cardinals and the Commanders. There are a couple of fantasy relevant players in there, but really nowhere near as bad as week 13, where basically we lost a lot of the really great players. So I think we should hopefully cope with that. Should we chat about some big news of the week?
Yeah, talking about like players that we've lost. It was a big one again this week, wasn't it?
Oh, it was terrible. A whole swathe of new injuries this week. Like, I feel like this whole season we've been talking about how many injuries there's been. And then the last couple of weeks, I was like, oh, I feel much better. Things have improved. And then this week came and we had Brian Robinson leaving with a hamstring, Ramondre leaving with an ankle injury, Tank Dell fracturing his fibula, not even catching a ball, crying about that one. Kenny Pickett with an ankle injury that had surgery today. Derek Carr with a concussion and a wrist injury. Derrick Henry with a concussion, although Mike Vrabel says he's not in the concussion protocol at the moment. Zach Charbonnet with a knee, which I'm not quite sure how bad that one is at the moment. Amari Cooper with a concussion. Christian Watson going out with his hamstring again. And Tyler Higbee in a concussion. So, I mean, look, Lewis, I don't even know where we start. And there were actually some more kind of injuries where players went on and off the field. So I haven't mentioned those because I would hopefully that means that they're not kind of ongoing ones. But based on kind of a few of these, what injuries are you most concerned about and which players do you think ultimately then we'll benefit from a fantasy point of view, seeing those bigger roles and potentially having more fantasy relevance for our teams?
Yeah, I just want to touch very quickly on Christian Watson for a second. It just kind of speaks to his entire career, doesn't it? That he caught 2 touchdowns and then left with a hamstring injury. That's kind of a summary of everything. I'm kind of into Jaden Reed and Romeo Dubs, but like it's impossible to know with Dontarian Wicks as well. Like you just can't know who the Packers are going to throw to in any given week. So I wouldn't really feel confident in predicting anyone there. But it's just such a shame because, he had an incredible night and then left injured. The big one this week is Tank Dell. Like that's really been kind of a fantasy darling in dynasty leagues. You might have got him in your 3rd round. I know I did quite a few places, and he's now absolutely exploded. And been a top 12 option pretty much every week. And look, just like prayers up for a man. Like that's so awful, and getting injured the way in which he did, where you just don't feel like a £167 receiver should be at the bottom of the pile on a run play in the goal line. In terms of kind of the fantasy impact going forwards, I think the answer is probably that Nico Collins is a league winner going forwards. I mean, he already has been. He's been an absolute steal, but like I think targets are probably just going to go his way. When you look at the game yesterday, you actually had Noah Brown with 2 targets, didn't catch either. Robert Woods with none, and Nico Collins had 12. They also threw the ball to Brevin Jordan, the tight end, a couple of times or a few times, and Dalton Schultz should hopefully be back next week. So in terms of like the winner off the back of that, I think it's probably Schultz more than anyone else. When I was looking into the target share, obviously like Noah Brown was injured for a little bit, but it doesn't seem right because Noah Brown had an absolute monster week a few weeks ago when kind of every single Texans piece exploded. But when you look at it on the season, Robert Woods has 57 targets and Noah Brown has 28. Like it didn't feel like it should be double for Robert Woods, even if he's been kind of a more stable piece in the team. And then in terms of like snaps, like Robert Woods is on the field nearly as much as Tank Dell and Nico Collins has been. Now, fair play, he's a good veteran presence. He's really good in the run game as well. He's a really good blocker. But like maybe Robert Woods has a little bit more relevance going forwards. He's a really versatile player, which is kind of the same thing that Tank Dell's been doing. But I think the answer is probably just Nico Collins getting an unreal amount of volume. Is there anyone on the Texans that you're kind of interested in?
I think realistically it has to be Nico, doesn't it? I know you were saying that Robert Woods has actually been on the field a lot and caught quite a lot of targets, but he just seems to be getting these kind of low importance targets, isn't he? Like you wouldn't believe that he's got 52 balls this season, would you? No. Because he's been kind of nowhere on the radar, whereas Noah Brown's caught half of his, but they've either been down the field or they've been for a touchdown or whatever that might be, and ultimately he's been way more fantasy relevant. I think the issue is that Brown has had this injury and I don't think he's 100% now. So I think ultimately it goes down to Collins and probably Schultz. But ultimately, I think Collins is going to be the main benefactor, isn't he? I think here.
Yeah. And then looking into some of the other injuries, so the only one that really caught my eye was looking at the Browns, because I think a lot of the others we're not 100% sure on. But looking into Cooper's concussion, well, Elijah Moore was actually the one yesterday, even before Amari Cooper went out. He saw 12 targets from Joe Flacco. Now, he only caught 4 of them, but that was still for over 80 yards, and he was a really solid DFS play yesterday. He obviously has the connection with Joe Flacco from the Jets. He was kind of hyper targeted when Flacco was starting there. And when I was first putting together my notes on this, I was thinking it's probably too late now to try and go and pick up Elijah Moore. Like he was the real waiver darling last week when we found out that Flacco was going to be starting. But according to Sleepy, he's only rostered in 49% of leagues. So he absolutely could be out there. Do I think he's going to be a league winner? Probably not, because I just don't think the upside is there. But I think you can sort of pencil him in for 4 catches for 40 to 60 yards in every game the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're having problems with like the back end of your bench or, these flex spots and you just need someone to get you 5 to 10 points every week, then Elijah Moore's your guy, isn't he?
Yeah. And then the last one, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later on, Zeke. Now, Zeke's a really strange one because the Patriots offense didn't score a single point this week. Fascinates me that the Chargers scored 6 points and won. I think that's so much fun. And they look, they just couldn't move the ball. But like in PPR leagues, Zeke was a really good play this week. Like he caught 4 balls for 40 yards. He struggled on the ground, 17 carries for 52. But like without Ramondre and without like an established wide receiver core, and with bad quarterbacks, whether it's Zappy again next week or whether they go back to Mac Jones or whether they give Malik Cunningham a start, like none of them are good. I wouldn't be surprised if again he has a pretty stable floor as like a RB3 flex type player going into next week, which seems mad to say at this point for Zeke. But again, according to Sleeper, only rostered in 46% of leagues, so like absolutely could be out there. It doesn't feel nice. It doesn't feel like a good thing to do. But again, if you're kind of struggling going into next week, say you had James Conner and Curtis Samuel on bye, you can probably go out there and pick up Zeke and he'll probably score you 8 to 10 points, and sometimes that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, I think sometimes you need a floor in some of your teams, and some of your teams where you're kind of on the edge of the playoffs, you need a ceiling. So I think if you're like comfortably in the playoffs and you just need someone to get you through the next few weeks while X player comes off IR or Y player is on a bye, then I think Zeke is a perfectly fine guy to pick up just to fill a spot while you kind of figure out what else you're going to do.
Yeah, like there's no ceiling there at all. The ceiling is like 14 points. But like if you need someone to just sort of hold up the rest of your team and not shoot for the stars, then like yeah, it could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, ultimately he's on the Patriots and they're doing nothing. So he isn't going to be that league winner, is he? But he is going to give you a few points. And if that's what you need to plug into a hole, then hopefully he's there on your waivers.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I do think I know we'll carry on in a second. I do think my prediction of the Patriots getting the first overall pick a couple of weeks ago could potentially be in play.
I don't know. I can't. I just do not see the Panthers giving it up now. I think
No.
we're too far down that road. I mean, obviously it's not their pick anymore. It's for the Bears, but and I'm sure they're going to do everything they can to possibly win. But I just think they're so dysfunctional. I know the Patriots are also extremely dysfunctional, but I think the Patriots won 2 games already. I just don't see the Panthers winning any more games. So I think it's possible, but I think ultimately the Pats will be the 1 or 2. But I'm just really interested to see if Bill Belichick will be the guy that makes the pick, because I really feel like this is a point now that it just feels like a logical point for them to part ways with him. And I'm just really interested to see if they actually do it, because obviously they've got a massive history with him. And then also if they do, where he gets another job, and if he gets another job. Really intriguing. Quite excited to see what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is. I have said for a while that I don't think they will fire Bill Belichick because I just don't think there's a world in which that's how they want this to end. I wouldn't be surprised if him and Robert Kraft have a conversation to be like, look, I think this is it. Like, we're going to have to go into a rebuild. We're going to end up with Drake May. We have like no pieces on the roster. It's going to be, 3 years until we get this thing going again. Yeah, you might want to be going for that all-time wins record, but like, man, I don't think you're going to be racking up more than 5 wins a season here for the next few years. So I think for them, it would be good to kind of overhaul the whole thing and just get a bit more modern, really. Go out and get a more like an offensive-minded head coach and people who look into data and like really kind of turn the franchise around. Belichick will get a job somewhere. I don't know. I don't think he'd take anything less than a head coaching job. So I'd be intrigued to see where that ended up. But I wouldn't be surprised if, a franchise that's really on the ropes or one with a potential new owner, looking at maybe I wouldn't want to see it, but like the Panthers or the Commanders who have relatively new ownership, really new with the Commanders, and are looking to kind of grow the market, whether they go for like a not just a big name head coach, but like maybe the greatest coach of all time.
I think the Commanders make the most sense because the thing that I find most interesting is obviously he has been, head coach and also GM. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine him then having to go and work with a GM. Like, I just think he would struggle to do that. At least with the Commanders, I think there's a chance they clear house and could say, right, we'll let you go with it. But I would be nervous about that if I was the Commanders, because we've seen how that's gone over the last few years, and he's not drafted well. And, do you trust him to kind of start doing that with your franchise? So I'm just really intrigued because he's had so many hats at the Patriots, and I'm just interested to see how he kind of gets on. He's got into his little rhythm for 20 odd years that he's been there. How will he cope with going somewhere else and having to beat to a different drum,
Yeah.
So there's literally now only 5 weeks left of the regular season of NFL football. I mean, this season's gone ridiculously quickly, and, fantasy football season is even closer to finishing. But I thought it'd be interesting just to see if we could predict who might be in the playoffs for each conference. So in the NFL playoffs, and who we think will clinch that number one seed. Shall we start with let's start with the NFC, because I think we're reasonably similar on this one, aren't we, Lewis? What are your thoughts with the NFC?
I think we've got the same picks. So for me, for the division winners, I've got the 49ers, Eagles, Lions, and Falcons. The Falcons, man, like they're gonna get pumped in the first round, but like it's the state of the playoffs. Someone's got to win the division. And then for the wild card teams, I've gone for the Cowboys. That's already locked up. And then for the other two, it's between three. So it's between the Vikings, Packers, and Rams. And just looking at momentum at the minute, I think it's the Packers and I think it's the Rams, which I can't work out how I feel about. Like I was saying before we started recording, the Rams currently pick at 17, just outside of the playoffs. And I think that's the worst spot to be. But I can't see the Vikings winning many more games. The Rams have a few hard games, but also a few really easy ones. So I think we definitely are on course for at least 3 more wins, and I think that clinches us the 7th seed.
Yeah, I just, the guys around Seattle, I think they're in free fall now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They
Oh, I
seem to
forgot about Seattle.
yeah, they seem to be struggling, at the moment. I think, even though, it was a great game, wasn't it, on Thursday night? And I thought Seattle stayed in there. Really annoying. I benched Gino in one of my leagues that I needed to win. And then obviously he goes off and scores like 30 odd points. I was like, why would you do this to me? So I'm mad at him at the moment because I was like, they're playing the Cowboys. He was injured last week. He was rubbish. So I was like, right, I can't go through this again.
Yeah.
And then obviously he goes and puts up that performance. I'm like, how very dare you? But I do totally feel like they are in a bit of a free fall. And I do think their schedule's not the easiest coming up either. So I just can't, I think they think that they should be in, but I just don't see them. I think they've regressed this year. I really do.
Yeah.
And I just don't see them so they've got the Niners coming up this week. They're going to lose. Then they've got the Eagles. They're going to lose. So that's 2 losses already. The Titans, they could probably win. But I just think their schedule is too hard and they're not playing well enough for them to get in. Steelers. And then week 18 is the
Cardinals.
Yeah, so they could win 2, but I just think those 2 losses are not going to be enough for them to stay in.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I totally agree. Now, the one thing we were kind of discussing earlier was that we've both picked the 49ers to be the 1 seed, but actually they're currently 1 game back from the Eagles. So ultimately they need to gain a game. And I do wonder, even if they gain a game, will they, if they're both on the same, are the Niners then the 1 seed because they've beaten the Eagles, or does this home away division conference thing make it? This is where I get a bit confused.
I think it comes down to in division. So I think I think if they're in division, then tie breaking is head to head. Aside from that, I think it comes down to in division games. Although that might be wrong. It might just be as simple as head to head, in which case it would be the 49ers. If not, when it comes to in division, I think the Niners have it. But yeah, we're at the stage in the season where like I just genuinely don't know all of the different reasons what could potentially happen. Yeah, the 49ers are 3-0 in division. Actually, as are the Eagles currently. So
Yeah.
that could be an interesting one. So if it's head to head, then it's the 49ers. But when we're looking at the schedules of the two, so looking at the Eagles' schedule rest of season, it's at Dallas this week, at Seattle, then at home to the Giants, at home to the Cardinals, and at the Giants to close out the season. So that's, I mean, the Cowboys is the hardest matchup there. Then for the 49ers, it's Seattle at home, at the Cardinals, Baltimore at home, at the Commanders, and then the Rams at home. So for both of them, kind of one more difficult matchup. The key thing to me here is momentum, and I think momentum is really against the Eagles right now. And I just can't see anyone stopping the 49ers. I can't see how you beat them right now. But that 49ers Ravens matchup is going to be an absolute joy to watch.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, potentially this, in some scenarios, could be the Super Bowl, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, ultimately, the Ravens are going to win the AFC North because it's everybody else is injured.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're going to get in the playoffs and they could certainly make it. I'm really excited to see if Baltimore play Miami. I think that's going to be a really interesting game. You know, but ultimately this could be a Super Bowl type game. And I'm really excited to see how mainly this Baltimore defense stack up against this San Fran offense. I think it's going to be really interesting. So looking forward to that one. The team we didn't actually mention, which could still potentially win the NFC East, is the Cowboys.
Yeah.
Now, I know they've only won or beaten teams that are less than 500, but I think they've been playing some really great football, particularly on offense. You know, they took that massive beating from the 49ers, but I think since that game, they've really kind of started to turn it around. So they do still have a shot. I think the schedule is a bit harder than the Eagles. So, you know, it's not, you know, a given, but I think there's a chance that they could still win.
Yeah, well, when you're just looking at record alone, like the Cowboys are 9-3, which is the same record as the 49ers. The Lions are also 9-3. Like they are not out of the hunt just yet. I just can't really see it. I just can't live in a world where the Lions are the 1 seed. I can't see how that can ever happen. The Cowboys, like MVP odds change all the time, but like I think Dak is actually the MVP favorite at this point, and like for very good reason. He's been playing elite football recently, and the fact that they can win in different ways, like the defense obviously was on top for the majority of the season, but then gave up 30 points against the Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. So, and it was then the offense that had to pull out the bag instead. So the Cowboys are a really interesting one. I don't believe in them in the playoffs just because I think it's the character of the team that they fall out at that stage. But like if you told me that any one of those 3 teams finished in the 1 seed, I could get on board with it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Cowboys' Achilles heel is ultimately the Niners and the Eagles, and just can't never quite get past them.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's always going to be their downfall. Should we quickly chat about the AFC?
Yeah.
So I think we differ a little bit here, not much, but a little. So who are your teams that are going to go in, and who's your 1 seed?
Yep. So division winners, I've got the Dolphins, Ravens, Chiefs, and Jags. I think that kind of speaks for itself. I'd be really surprised if it's anything else at this point. The Dolphins, by the way, I'm furious about because I had an ACCA which is looking like it's likely to get 7 out of 8, and I picked the Bills over the Dolphins, so that's the one which is losing me out on 1,500 quid. Then for my wildcard teams, I've got the Bills, I've got the Texans, who actually are currently not making playoffs, which I was really surprised about, that they are actually currently sitting just outside, because it's currently the Steelers, Colts, and Browns are the 5, 6, and 7 seeds. But with the directions those franchises are in at the minute, I couldn't really go for them. And then for my 7 seed, I've actually gone for the Broncos. They were on the biggest win streak in the NFL. They obviously just lost this week, but they are still 6-6. I can potentially see them making it in just in terms of momentum. For my 1 seed, I've gone with the Dolphins. The Dolphins have a really relatively easy schedule rest of season. They've got, no, to be fair, they end on some quite hard games, but they've got the Titans and then the Jets the next 2 weeks, and then Cowboys, Ravens, Bills. So that'll be really interesting. When you look at the Ravens, their schedule, again, probably just as hard. Jags, 49ers, Dolphins, Steelers. So and then the Rams this week. So both quite hard. I think for me, I just think it's the Dolphins now. Like I think they're probably in terms of momentum going to keep it up and keep it going and end up in the 1 seed.
Yeah, I'm similar. There's 2 differences I have between you. So I have the same division winners. I also have Buffalo. I think Buffalo are very lucky that basically everyone above them lost this week, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's kept them in the hunt. I've got the Texans because I just think they're playing really great football at the moment. And then I've actually got the Browns instead of the Broncos. Now, I know that they basically don't have a quarterback, and that defense has been carrying them, and the defense is not playing particularly well at the moment. But I just have no confidence in the Broncos at this point.
Yeah.
I was just having a look at both of their schedules, and the Broncos, I think, do have the slightly harder schedule to the Browns. The Browns, they do have a couple of difficult games, but they also have relatively cake matchups. 18, they've got the Bengals. Well, they're going to win that because the Bengals are just a disaster. Jets going to win that. They do play the Texans, which I think is going to be interesting. Texans will probably beat them, but I do think they'll just cling on. I think they'll manage to scrape a few wins together and just cling on. I think the fact that they're in there at the moment kind of has made me more confident that they're more likely to stay in. I think if they were out, there'd be no way that they kind of claw themselves up and into the situation. But I think the fact that they're there, I do think they'll stay. Pittsburgh, I think, disaster. But I've got no confidence that Denver's going to be able to kind of work their way up and get into the playoffs at this point.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that neither of us have gone for the Steelers and the Colts, who are actually the 2 teams that are in the 6 and 7 seed currently. I just can't talk myself into a Mitch Trubisky and Gardner Minshew-led team making the playoffs, even though they're in currently. I just can't see it. I just can't live in a world where those 2 quarterbacks are playoff quarterbacks.
No, I mean, the Colts have been playing pretty good football, and they've actually got the Bengals next week. They're going to win. Steelers, that's been an interesting one because these are the 2 where you're like, these are Falcons. They do have some reasonable matchups. Raiders, they could squeeze in, but Minshew's just good at making mistakes, isn't he? And I think ultimately that will be their downfall. Yeah. Now, I also have a different 1 seed. I actually have the Ravens as the 1 seed. Now, they're the same. They have the same win-loss ratio. And Miami is still in the 1 seed at the moment. But I don't know. I just think Miami, maybe they've got into another gear and they're not going to let the throttle go. But I do think sometimes they can trip up. I just don't think Baltimore will at this point. So I'm going for Baltimore as the 1 seed. I just find it really interesting that Kansas City is currently the 4th seed, and it makes me happy and laugh all at the same time.
That we're not even talking about the Chiefs finishing in the 1 seed. And let's be honest, they probably will. They just find a way to. They find a way to. His name is Patrick Mahomes. That's how they do it. But it's just fascinating to be in a position where are the Chiefs even that good? Are they, they got stomped by the Packers last night. Are they even a hugely good team? They'll win the division, but I don't know. I'm really excited for that playoff fixture and to see how that looks. Give me Chiefs Texans in the first round as the 4 and the 5 seeds and see how that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I should dislike the Ravens more than the Chiefs because they're in the same division as the Bengals. But I genuinely dislike the Chiefs way more than the Ravens, and I would much rather the Ravens win the Super Bowl than the Chiefs. much
There's a fun
rather.
little rivalry between the Bengals and the Chiefs,
Oh,
which is
we
quite
hate each other.
yeah, and it's just because you're like, no, we have the more talented quarterback. No, we have the more talented quarterback. And then there's everyone else sat on the side, like, yeah, we know, guys, we know you've got the best quarterbacks in the NFL. What
Yeah,
about the rest of us?
I think it's because the last 2 seasons we jostled, didn't win the AFC Championship game. We won the first one, they won the second one, and there was
Yeah,
the whole, Burrowhead, blah blah blah. I think it just has been very intense, and then ultimately, obviously, we've not been able to keep our side of the bargain this season. But there's just it's just that rivalry that I can't let go of, even though we're playing rubbish at the moment. So I'm really interested to see how everything's going to play out. I think it's really exciting. It's one of those years where I think at the beginning of the year, you think you've got it all figured out. Oh, obviously these teams are going to be in. This team is going to go X, Y, and Z. These are definitely going to be the 1 seed. And it's just gone, everything's been flipped on its head. Everyone thought Miami would be probably good this season, but I don't think anybody thought they'd be sat in the 1 seed spot at this point and things like that. And I just think it's been a really fun season because anything could happen, and still anybody could, or not anybody, but there's still so many teams that could get into
yeah.
the bottom of the playoffs. I think it's just really exciting this season.
Can we? I know we've got a whole show to get on to. Can we do a very, very quick 2 minutes of MVP chat?
Do it.
Because I have just been tweeting about this and I'm fascinated by it. That like Tyreek Hill's the MVP this year, right? And there's no chance he wins that award. He's not even close to winning that award. But like, so currently the favorite is Dak. Then I think in second is now Purdy. Lamar's up there. Mahomes is up there. Hurts is up there. Tua has like half the odds that Tyreek Hill has, which is crazy because Tua would be nothing without Tyreek Hill. And it just makes me so cross. And I know half of the NFL fans feel the same way, that the MVP award is just a quarterback award. And like, yeah, the most valuable player is always going to be a quarterback because of the nature of the position. But like, if it were just best player in the NFL, if that were how we did it, it's Tyreek Hill, and it's not even close. And like, his odds are so high because everyone knows that he's not going to win it, and he'll win Offensive Player of the Year, and it'll be fine. Maybe we can do awards next week and talk through our selections for everything. But like, it just makes me so mad that I'm like, why can you be on pace for not just 2,000 yards, but like absolutely eclipsing 2,000 yards, and it doesn't even matter, and you're not even any close to winning MVP?
I know, like for me, I just think they need to change the name, don't they, of the award, basically. The most valuable quarterback, fine, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
But
just call it QB of the year.
yeah, but like MVP, the spirit of MVP is technically it can and should be anybody, but that's not the theory of it, which is frustrating, isn't it? And it kind of feels like, offensive player of the year, great, but it kind of feels like that step down
Yeah.
from MVP, and it shouldn't feel like that. I think they just need to kind of level the playing field for all of these awards, really, rather than saying, well, you were the best person in the whole league, when it's not necessarily true.
Yeah. Or like, and just be honest and just call it quarterback of the year.
Yeah.
And then you can have offensive, or you can even you can just say non-quarterback of the year. Like, it's fine. And to be fair, if you're being even more honest, call it skill position of the year, because like,
I
you know,
know.
an
I
O
feel so
lineman
sorry
is
for the
never going to
trenches.
win it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're never going to get. You can have a dominant season from Trent Williams, and it's never going to happen. So just call it quarterback of the year, skill position player of the year, and leave it at that.
I know. It doesn't seem fair, does it? It
No.
doesn't at all. But again, another fascinating award. Really interested to see where it's going to go. I think if Dak keeps this up, he's going to win it
I think so.
ultimately, because I like Purdy, great, but he is just, he just distributes the ball. I personally think,
Yeah,
he's adding more than a Garoppolo, but he isn't carrying that offense like we discussed earlier. Ultimately, he's there to give the ball to the people that are going to make the plays,
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you look at like Purdy versus Tyreek, and the odds currently, it's like Purdy was like 3-1 or something like that, and Tyreek was like 17-1. So like you're telling me that like Brock Purdy is like 3 or 4 times more likely to win this award, and they are like the antithesis of each other, man. That like Tyreek Hill can take anything and do unbelievable things with it. It's electric with the ball in his hands. Purdy is the guy giving it to the players who can then, take it 70 yards down the field. Like I just can't see how you can justify like Purdy being more valuable than Tyreek Hill.
No, I know, but they do, don't they? And
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're just going to have to make peace with it, Lewis, that it's going to be a quarterback from now on. I think this is the closest we're ever going to get to a skill position player ever getting it, and it's still not going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately so.
So shall we get back on to talking some fantasy? I think people might be fed up of us chatting NFL, although hopefully you might have their own ideas and they can chat to us too. So as usual, we're going to do Rewind the Tape, and we're going to discuss the things that we've learned from this week that should help us as fantasy managers as we get kind of deeper into the season, into the final throws and getting towards the playoffs. So Lewis, what kind of have you learned from this week that's going to help you moving forward?
This is something we've spoken about a lot, about sort of stashing backup running backs. And to me, it's like, just don't drop them. Just never, never drop them, because they are only ever one injury away from being incredibly valuable. So I've brought up 3 here, which is Tyjae Spears, who obviously had a decent enough game taking over the role from Henry when he went out, even though Henry is now going to be back. Chuba Hubbard, who was really fantastic this week. And, it's not a case for him of like that he was the backup and now someone's got injured and now he's gonna take it over. It's just the case that like he is now the lead back, and looks good money for it as well. Trevor Harvard was the running back 5 on the week, 25 carries for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Zeke, who we spoke about earlier, that like Ramondre goes down and Zeke finishes pretty high. And I just think it's a case that like they are just going to explode the moment that the lead back goes down. So if you have Elijah Mitchell and you've been thinking he's just done nothing, like if you've got space, just keep him, like because you just can't be sure. One injury and suddenly these are the most valuable players in the league.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty, isn't it? Sometimes people will drop, these backup running backs because they're doing nothing for someone like, let's use Elijah Moore as an example. And you're going to put Elijah on your bench and probably never even play him, or maybe play him once when you've got, buys. And then you've dropped Tyjae Spears because he wasn't doing anything for you. And then all of a sudden, Derrick Henry gets injured. And now you're like, oh, like the upside of Spears is always going to be higher than any kind of random wide receiver that you're going to pick up off waivers this deep into the season. So I think ultimately people kind of forget that and they're like, oh, they're not doing anything for me. I don't want them. This is something that actually Murph has said a lot, really from when I very first started, and it's something that always kind of has kept with me, that, as you kind of get from halfway through the season, really, aside from players to kind of get you through buys, the rest of your bench should really be these backup running backs.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they're one injury away from becoming a league winner for you. And if you happen to have the right backups on your bench, you're laughing all the way to a championship, And I think people forget to do that.
Yeah.
And then they end up having not enough fab to get the guy, or they spend all their fab on the guy and then the original guy's back next week, or whatever that might be, and ultimately I think if you were ahead of the game, you added them for free, when nobody was looking at them, or for $1 or whatever, you're laughing all the way to winning.
Well, some of the absolute league winners this year are players that you would have picked up really cheap early on. And just like in the running back position, like Achan, Kyron, Chuba, Zach Moss, like even looking at like someone like Jerome Ford now, Mostert, like it's players that you either were the backup or like was kind of unclear backfields that you can go, well, I'll take the cheaper option, or I'll take a later round option if I'm not sure, and then they're going to propel me to a title. Like Kyron Williams was undrafted, and after week 1 you could have picked him up off waivers, and he has been absolutely elite down the stretch.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I always find it interesting because I think people are really scared to, not draft a running back early, because historically that's been the mindset, you must draft a running back early because this cliff comes. But more and more and more, recently what they call the 0 RB strategy is working for people. Like, it's tough. It's so tough at the beginning of the season. I didn't do it a lot. Historically, I've always drafted running backs high, but this year with a couple of my leagues, I have, decided, right, well, I'm just going to pick up some of these wide receivers and see what I get at running back. And it was terrible. The first few weeks, I was like, this is a disaster. I'm getting like 1 point from a running back, room. But it comes to this point of the season, and they're basically winning, your weeks because the guy in front of them went down, or, they've actually got going, or whatever that might be. And I think people are very short-sighted in drafts. They're like, right, who's going to help me win weeks 1 to 4? And then they draft like that. And then, actually it's a really long season. It really is. And I think you've got to, sometimes you have to be patient, and people aren't very good at doing that.
Yeah. And you've got to strategize as well, that like if you draft in the way that you drafted, that you're like, right, I'm going to target early wide receivers, and I'm going to go, I'm drafting for the back of the first round. I'm going to go CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'm going to wait on running backs. Well, if you've gone that way, then you have to, when some of those backfields are starting to look a bit more uncertain, whether it's before the season starts or whether it's after week 1, you have got to be super aggressive on waivers to go and get that guy. That, like, if week 1 goes past and you think Kyren Williams is sharing this backfield at the least, go and spend FARB on him. Like, you have to go out and pick up those players. But it's just a case of then, like, okay, this is how my draft's gone. How do I then need to look at like, what's my path to winning this season? And if you've drafted early wide receivers and you've not got any like 3 down backs, you've got to be taking the punt on like Jalen Warren and Kyren Williams and Mostert to be like, well, okay, for me to win, I need to hit on a bunch of late round backs. So I've got to be really aggressive in getting those players.
I mean, Mostert's a fantastic late round back, wasn't he? I think I picked him up basically in the last round of loads of leagues, and he's,
everywhere.
He's been a running back 1 for me, for the whole season. Like, it's been amazing. And I just think if you're going to go down that strategy where you wait on running backs, then more of your bench needs to be running backs, and it needs to be these, like, murky backfield guys that are definite kind of handcuffs that are going to get a really good role if the guy behind them goes down, and ultimately you've just got to balance your bench a bit differently, I think. And I think people kind of struggle to realize that. And then that's where they kind of run into trouble, because they don't draft a running back, and then they're not quick enough on waivers to pick them up, or they don't fill their bench enough. And then they end up with nothing at running back, and then you get into trouble, because ultimately you do have to start at a minimum 2 every week. I mean, the running back position this season's been really just terrible, like absolute drab awfulness. But still you need 2 of them to do something. So that's really interesting, and it kind of my point kind of, I guess, runs on from that, and that's, you can still squeeze a little bit of life on your waiver wire even when you're in week 13. So don't rest on your laurels. So like you said, Lewis, if there's any of those guys sitting on your waivers. So I just had a quick look at one of my leagues, is a 12-team like short bench league. So often there's more of these guys available, but I thought I'm going to have a look and see who's available on waivers this week. So we've got Zeke. So again, yes, he's probably not going to be a league winner, but he's going to be a decent guy to put in a running back spot if you need someone to fill in. Kenneth Gainwell. Now, DeAndre Swift went off with an injury. We don't know what it is. It might be minor, he might not do anything, but Kenny is starting to be a bit more involved in the backfield again. And if Swift does ultimately miss with injury, I think Kenneth Gainwell could potentially, be a high-end running back for you. Damian Pierce, he took over running back 1 role again this week. So someone had dropped him. If he continues with that running back 1 role in this offense, he could certainly be putting up some good points. And the other guy was Brevin Jordan. Now Schultz might be back next week, but ultimately, again, the tight end position, bit of a crapshoot, kind of at the low end tight end 1 range. So he's an easy guy that you could pick up that would fill and probably put you up some Titan one, low Titan 1 points for you just off the waiver wire. So there's still guys that you can pick up. So I would always just say don't abandon the waiver wire at this point. I think, oh, my team's set, I'm ready to go, I've got all these studs. What if all your studs get injured next week? Someone else has picked everyone else up on waivers and you're stuck.
Yeah, I think it's just a big learning point of like, just because we're going into week 14 doesn't mean you don't have to be playing waivers anymore. Like, there are still valuable pieces out there. There are still pieces that you can potentially pick up and start. And like, I had it last season that not last season, season before, I won a championship in my home league. And when I looked at the team that I won the championship with, it was when, I can't remember the name of the running back. His name skipped my head, but like it was Eckler got injured and there was a backup running back on the Chargers who went off like 30 points in championship week. I had Antonio Brown when he was on the Bucks. Like, I had drafted 2 of the players that were on my championship winning team, and not just that, I'd picked like 2 or 3 of them up on waivers that week. Like, you can win championships with players if you're still playing matchups. So like, just keep it going until the last minute.
Yeah, 100%. I actually saw on X this week, JJ Zachariason was saying that he has a football team. Everybody's injured, and he'd picked up a load of, randomers off the waiver wire, and they'd given him enough points to keep him into the next round. Like, he managed to cobble together his team enough from waiver ads, streaming matchups, that he managed to get into the next round of the playoffs. So you can do it. You really can. It's about shooting for the upside, isn't it? Like we've said previously, look for these upside guys that have got good matchups, because if they hit, then they're going to really hit and they're going to help you get through.
Yeah.
So, fantasy stud of the week. Now, obviously, this is where we look at the under the radar player who could overperform and exceed expectations. So, according to Paul, apparently last week I went for K. Dotton. And of course, because K. Dotton got mentioned and my name got mentioned, he scored a big fat 0, didn't he? Next week, when we don't mention him, he's going to go off and be like timed 1 on the week. But anyway,
is he not your stud of the week again this week then?
Well, I've given up on him now. Every time I mention his name, he's not a stud. So that's it. Me and K. Dotton are not friends anymore. Now, Lewis, I reckon you knew something here, Lewis, on the grapevine, because you went for Zeke this week. And it's like you knew that Ramondre was going to go out basically at the beginning of the game. And of course, 17 carries, 52 yards and 4 receptions for 40 yards. So, like, genuinely did barely anything. And he finished as a running back 13. This is the running back landscape for you this season. All you have to do is touch the ball a couple of times and you're running back 13.
Yeah.
Paul went for Adam Thielen. Unfortunately, he didn't have the bounce back week that Paul had hoped for. He had 3 receptions for 25 yards and finished as a wide receiver at 45. So, Lewis, you are winner of Stud of the Week for week 13. Congratulations. So, come on now. You're going to need to try and keep up that streak. Who are you going for this week?
I want to mention 2, but one's a very, very brief one. Which is not the player that I'm actually going for, but just someone that I wanted to bring up is Jalen Tolbert, who obviously the Cowboys' potential wide receiver 3, it seems like, behind obviously Schultz. Behind Lamb and Brandon Cooks. They are playing the Eagles this week, and I'd be really interested. He's going to be super available, and I can just see him catching a touchdown. He's had a decent snap percentage. But my actual stud of the week, I just thought I'd throw in a second one without Paul. I've gone for Christian Kirk playing against the Browns. He's had a really up and down season. He's wide receiver 30, but he's the target leader on the Jags with 86. Obviously, Calvin Ridley has kind of shown out the last couple of weeks. We'll see how he does tonight. But Calvin Ridley has been a top 10 wide receiver the last couple of weeks. And Christian Kirk kind of has quite a stable floor, but I'm not sure the upside has quite been there. He tends to play out of the slot a lot, especially now with Zay Jones back. And against the Browns, we've obviously mentioned how good the D line is. And when I was watching yesterday with the Rams playing the Browns, you just have to pass against them. Like, they set up to try and funnel you to pass, because you just can't run on them in the same way. Like, their D line is so good that they want you to pass. And it means that you almost have to pass as a bit of an extension of the running game. And so having Christian Kirk running on more routes underneath and towards the middle of the field out of the slot, I think he could potentially be on course for a big game. I can just see it, and I think it's going to be a really interesting game. So I think he could have a lot of that kind of middle of the field work, where if they can't really run in the way they want to.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I find they're similar to were similar to the Texans wide receivers, where one guy will have a good week, one guy will have a bad week, and I think originally it was kind of more matchup type based, and then now the last couple of weeks, Ridley seems to have kind of really hit his stride, and that's taken a little bit away from Kirk. But we know that they're both really good wide receivers, and ultimately, they can and should get, both of them can be fantasy relevant. So interesting to see if Kirk can kind of find his way back into a bit more fantasy relevance over the last kind of portion of the season. So Paul did send his studs and scares in. I really wanted to be mean and just randomly pick a random player like he did to me last week, but I'm too kind, Paul. Just remember that. So Paul has said Cortland Sutton this week. He thinks he's going to be a stud this week. The guy that I've gone for this week is Jaden Reed. I do think he's quietly having quite a nice rookie season. I think at the start of the season we thought he probably wasn't going to play much at all, but he is currently the wide receiver 36 on the season. Now, I know that's not, a fantastic season, but I think that's probably more than we kind of envisaged him kind of doing and getting. He was a bit quiet this week, but I do think there's a chance, with this next week coming on, that he's going to be busier. Obviously, we know that Watson re-aggravated his hamstring. I think I'd be very surprised if he plays this next week. And Jordan Love is just really hitting his stride at this point. The last few games, he's really seemed to be putting everything in place and looks like he could be quite a competent starting NFL quarterback. And then, of course, this week they play the Giants, who give up the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So I do think Reed could have quite a nice week this week. So I'm going to go for Jaden Reed.
I like it. It's a player that I actually have a lot of, and my Scott Fishbowl team could really do with Jaden Reed having a big week if I even make week 3 of playoffs.
Yeah, I've got a terrible... I've just lost Carr and now Howell's on a bye, and then I had Joe Burrow. So ultimately, I potentially have no quarterbacks going into week 14. So I think I should be safe going into week 14, but I think after that might be the end of my run, unfortunately. Shall we look at our fantasy scares of the week? So again, this is a guy that's usually hyped up or, is what we consider a stud who could underperform and upset us on our fantasy teams. So last week, Lewis, you went with Nico Collins. So you did awesome with your scares, but with your
Didn't
studs.
go well.
No, the scares didn't go quite so well. And I think, you weren't to know that unfortunately Tank Dell would get injured. So Nico ended up being the wide receiver 1 on the week.
My scare and stud. My stud was right because of an injury, and my scare was wrong because of an injury.
Absolutely. So process. It's all about process, isn't it, Lou? I know. Paul went with Kyler, which I think actually did pretty well because he ended up being quarterback 16 on the week, so he wasn't even quarterback 1, which usually that's, you expect Kyler to be in the top 10 really, at least. So I think Paul did pretty well there. Apparently, according to Paul, I went with CD, but of course I didn't, so I'm just going to ignore that and carry on. So go on then, Lewis. Who is your scare for week 14?
Well, I was really tempted to go with, when I was looking through matchups and I saw it's Texans against the Jets, and I was like, oh, Nico Collins against Sauce Gardner, and then I was like, no, don't do it again. The one I'm going with is Chris Olave against the Panthers. Chris Olave is quietly having a decent season. He's wide receiver 16. He's gone over 100 yards the last 2 weeks. So obviously, with Jameis probably playing with Derek Carr injured, it could just take one massive touchdown and that's it. The Panthers are sneakily really good against the quarterback position, and it's not because they're a good defense, it's because you can run all over them, so you just don't have to throw. So it just wouldn't surprise me if this is a game for Alvin Kamara and maybe Jamal Williams as well, and the Saints go out ahead early, and then Olave doesn't have a fantastic week.
Do you know what? These are both guys that I was thinking about putting in. So, certainly ones that I think could quite easily be scares of the week. Paul said Karen Williams. So interesting to see how that goes. Mine this week is Keenan Allen. Look, the Jags have been really flatlining of late, and they just don't seem to be able to get anything going, which is really, really interesting. Again, longer discussion to have another time. But obviously, they had the offensive coordinator come over from Dallas. He's been known to, kind of have this really quite energetic offense, and it just they don't seem to be able to put anything together. So I think it's a clean house at the end of this season, get everyone out and start again. This week they play the Broncos. The Broncos D is much improved, and I think they're going to look to take Allen away and just dare the Chargers to beat them with anybody else. And unfortunately, nobody else seems to be able to do anything, which is really upsetting for my Austin Eckler shares. But hey, what can you do? Wildcard of the week. Our hot takes that are going to happen this week. Now, last week, Paul said the Panthers would get the win. I mean, come on, Paul, now. We know how terrible the Panthers are. I don't know why he keeps going back to the Panthers well, but he was incorrect. Lewis, you said that the San Fran Philly game would disappoint and hit the under of 46.5 points. Well, the 49ers actually nearly hit that on their own. So unfortunately, you were also incorrect. So let's see if we can do any better this week. What have you got?
I was looking into players that I think could overperform this week, and I was stunned to see, because it doesn't feel like it, that DJ Moore is the wide receiver 9 on the year. I have said that he's going to be a top 5 wide receiver this week against the Lions. He went for 22.6 PPR points against them in week 11, obviously in that really close loss. And I can just really see him kind of pulling it out of the bag again this week. Like I say, it doesn't feel like he is wide receiver 9, so maybe it's not as wildcardy as I want it to be. But yeah, that's what I can see happening this week.
Yeah, I mean, he can be a bit up and down, can't he? So, it's still a good pick. Now, Paul is saying that the Steelers this Thursday night football is going to be so bad that they're going to have no more than 2 offensive touchdowns in the whole game.
I think it's Steelers Patriots, not Steelers Panthers.
Oh, is it? Oh, maybe he put Patriots and I put Panthers. Well, Steelers Patriots. Well, that definitely is not going to have any more than 2 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah, even worse.
Yeah, I was like, oh, even worse. And my wild card this week is that the Rams are going to beat the Ravens. I think it could happen. It could. I mean, the whole point of the wild card is it's unlikely, but could. So I'm going to go with it. As I say, it's probably not going to happen, but it's fun when these kind of random ones hit, isn't it? So I'm going.
I'll be happy if it does, but I can't see it.
No, I know the Ravens are coming off a bye as well, aren't they? But you never know. You never know. So thank you very much, Lewis. But this brings us to the end of the show. To everyone who's hung in with us for the whole hour, despite us chatting all sorts of different NFL-related things, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. And obviously, we've got our YouTube channel where you can search for the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast Network, and you can find all of our different podcasts on there, not just the Rewind show. So thank you very much, and thank you, Lewis. And of course, we'll be back next week to Rewind week 14.